Hey, it's Mega, aka the Art Messiah. I'm here to save you from your art sins. Welcome back to another art tutorial. Sorry for being a little late on this one. I've been pretty busy with work and stuff, but I'm excited to be back because I've been missing drawing and I've been missing kind of creating these tutorials. So today I kind of wanted to talk about basically practicing what we've already learned, which is drawing the figure in perspective. And I wanted to share with you guys a practice that I try to do every once in a while, even before like getting to drawing. I consider this kind of like a warm-up exercise. So basically what I want you to do, there is a website called Pose Maniacs. Unfortunately, it runs on Flash, so it's going to be unavailable by the end of this year. But for right now, you can still go into your Google, whatever web browser you're using, and you can turn on Flash so you can see what is happening on that website. But basically on that website, you have basically a list of all these different poses. And what's cool about it is that they categorize it by the viewing angle. So if you want to practice, shots where you're looking down on the character, then you can click on that setting and you can just keep on drawing those characters. Another really cool thing about that website is that you can rotate the model. Okay, so I went ahead and did that for a few different poses, and I brought it into Photoshop like you can see, and I would bring the opacity down, and I would basically draw directly over the pose. So you're breaking it down into your mannequin shapes, and you're studying the pose. You're just trying to figure out what it's looking like, what it's about, right? And then the step number 2 is to copy that pose from your imagination. So you turn that pose off, which I'm gonna do here in a little bit, and then you're going to try to recreate that pose from your imagination. So this is very challenging, but this is a great way to study because, one, it means that while you're copying, you really have to focus in on the details, the relationships, all that kind of stuff while you're going through the drawing. And that helps you to cement this information. And then when you go to draw it from your imagination, you really have to think and act on what you've learned, okay? So this is my favorite kind of learning. It's active learning, and it requires you to use your brain at your 100% capacity, and it helps you develop your sense of proportion and perspective. And don't feel too bad if you have to turn on the pose just for a second to kind of remember something. But basically at this point I was already done the general pose, and so I wanted to go back and make corrections, and this step is also very, very, very important. So while we move on to this next pose, I want to go over the 5 critical things that I look for while I'm doing these kinds of practices and studies, because it's never good to just copy from reference. You have to know what you're looking for and why you're looking for it. So the first thing that I look for is the overall shape. What is the overall shape that the body is making? What is the positive space versus the negative space? And I'll kind of talk about positive versus negative space in another video, but all I want you guys to kind of figure out and realize now that what does the general silhouette of the body kind of make before you even start filling in details. The second thing is the overlap, and especially in this pose, especially when you're drawing poses in perspective, you're going to get a lot of overlap. So in this case, you can kind of see how the pelvis is really overlapping the torso, and the torso is overlapping the head so much that you can barely see the head in this perspective. So those are the kinds of things you want to pay attention to while you're drawing over these reference images, is that you want to see basically in different perspectives how much of the body can you see, what starts to become excluded. And that kind of tells you a little bit more about the form of the body, the anatomy of the body, without necessarily knowing too much of the details, the muscles, the bone structure. So I want you guys to really pay attention to overlap while you're drawing perspective. The third thing I look at is the shape. And what I mean by shape, now I want to talk about like the specific shapes of the body, right? So we looked at the overall, the general shape. Now, this portion is like, okay, what is the shape of the leg? When it's turned this way, when it's at this angle, when it's coming at me, what kind of shape do I get for this body part? And that's why studying anatomy can be so difficult for beginners, is because they'll study it in one view, right? And then when it changes, you change your camera angle, or you change how you're viewing this part, it becomes really, really difficult to draw it, because you have no reference for how it looks at that angle, and it'll look completely different because you're just seeing different sides of the form. And the human body is very organic, okay? So that's why it makes it really challenging. And that's why you really need to do this practice, because you need to see the shape of all these body parts at various angles. And when you break it down into this cylinder and basic shapes like that, you can start to get a better grasp of what's happening of these organic shapes without getting lost in the detail. And that's why I want you guys to stick with the mannequin for right now. Okay, the fourth thing that I want to talk about is the relative size of body parts. Okay, and this kind of relates to number 2, which is the overlap. Basically, as perspective happens, you have overlap, but I also want you guys to realize and pay attention to the relative size of body parts. So compare the torso to the pelvis. We've already done a video about proportions specifically, but when it comes to drawing the pose dynamic, that changes, right? When stuff is in perspective, the things closer to you become bigger, the things further away become smaller, and you can always push those dynamics. But for right now, I want you guys to be just kind of focus in on the realism for right now. We're going to talk about stylization and making really dynamic poses later. Right now, I just want you guys to study the right way of how the human body looks. Okay, so that is the essential part of this exercise. Okay, and let me go ahead and go into the last point for this video, which is the number 5, and that is think of angles and lines that relate to one another. Okay, and you can see this while I'm drawing through these poses. I'm not remembering basically where everything is at based on my imagination. Based on my practices that I've already done, I know how the pelvis relates to the torso, because I've studied how the lines can kind of sweep from one part of the body to the other part of the body, and that can give you its location. And I know that sounds kind of abstract, but I'm going to make a video specifically on that. And it's coming up because we're going to be talking about gesture drawing, and that's where I'm going to talk about finding those rhythms. And you can see how I did it right here. Okay, you see those horizontal lines? That is helping me with the not only perspective, but how the body parts relate to one another. So you're finding these lines and these angles that really connect these body parts. Even if those body parts aren't connected, you're trying to figure out how things relate to one another. And again, this is a topic and a concept that just takes a little bit of practice and a little bit of observation. And that is what this practice is for. Observational study is very good, real life study is very good, but oftentimes we don't know how to study. And that is one issue that I had so much trouble with. I watched so many YouTube artists, and they would just say, practice, practice, practice makes perfect. And I had no idea what I was practicing. I had no idea what kind of exercises and studies I could do. And I never had an art teacher kind of explain that to me. And so I basically started coming up with my own exercises and my own ways of learning this stuff. And I think the most helpful YouTuber that I had found at that point in time, his name was Psychra, and you can look him up. He's got some great videos about this as well. But you need to practice, but you need to know what to practice. And this practice right here is probably the best practice to do when you want to learn how to draw the human figure from your imagination. So hopefully those 5 tips were helpful for you guys. Please try out this exercise. I usually do this right before I get into drawing and practicing my own poses that I come up with. I like to study from real life first and then give a go at it. So hope you liked the video. Until next time, take it easy. If you like this content and want to learn more about drawing and comic making, go ahead and follow me on Patreon. Thanks everyone for sticking around, and see you guys next time. Peace.